Part 2. You have your place value chart for decimals. Now we are going to discuss how can we use our base 10 blocks to represent decimals. How can we use our base 10 blocks to represent decimals? Remember these blocks from last year? This block represents 100 squares because if we count each square, there are 100 on this block. Here's our 10 rod. If we count each block, there are 10 rods. And then, of course, 1. How many rods of 10 will it take to make a 100? Yes, 10. 10 rods make up a 100, and 100 ones make up the big old 100 block. So just a quick review there. Let's discuss how we can use these base 10 blocks to represent decimals, to represent part of a whole number. Our whole is our hundredths block.
All right, so when we're using base 10 blocks to represent decimals, we're actually going to use the hundredths as our one whole. So the hundredths block is our one whole. In this case, we're going to, for example, it's going to be 1.0. One whole is one whole number. Therefore, each individual units in which we know there's 100 of them in a hundredths block is going to make up one whole. Therefore, the tenths is going to equal, if we have a decimal, 0.1. That's 1/10 is this number right here. So 10 of these is going to make up one whole because we know that there's 10 blocks in 100. And our ones are going to be 0.01, which is our hundredths place value. So the tens are going to represent our tenths place value, and our ones are going to represent our hundredths place value when we're working with decimals and base 10 blocks. So let's look a little bit about how we are going to actually
make sure that you have this in your notes. I would like for you to draw a small picture of something that represents this hundredths block, the tens, and the ones block. And not only that, note that the hundredths equal one whole. As a decimal, it's 1.0 if we put this number on our place value chart for decimals. Tenths, here is our tenths place value. It's to the immediate right of the decimal. The first number to the right of your decimal is your tenths place value. I know you already have it on your notes, just a review. And your ones, they represented as 0.01. So our place value here, this is our hundredths. Remember, this is for decimals. I know it's different with whole numbers, but that's why it's very important that we are writing this down, that we have our place value chart with decimals.
When we're using our base 10 blocks to represent decimals, remember our hundredths block is equal to one whole. Over here we have 0.6, which we could say is 6 tenths, because that 6 is in the tenths place value. Remember, whatever number is directly to the right of that decimal point is in the tenths place value. So to represent that, we are going to use, we know we don't have any numbers in the whole, we don't have any whole numbers, so we know we're not going to use any of these guys. No hundredths base 10 blocks. But we have 6 in the tenths value, and we know that our tenths block represents the tenths, so we're going to use 1, 2, 3, that's 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, and 6 tenths. Together, these make up 6 tenths. All right, let's try another problem. Let's look at this number. The first thing we want to do is say to ourselves, what is this number? Okay, we have a 0 and we have in the ones place value, so there's no whole numbers. So, and we have a 2 in the tenths place value. So all you do is write the number, so 2, and then that place value, so 2 tenths. Okay, then we think, how do we make this number using base 10 blocks? Remember, we don't use any hundredths blocks because there's no whole numbers, but where we have a 0. We've got 2 in the tenths place value, so we know, we're going to use 2 base 10 blocks to represent 2 tenths. 2 base 10 blocks equals 2 tenths. Okay, here we're going to practice writing words to represent our decimals. So the first thing you want to do is you start with the whole numbers when we're going to explain these numbers. So we've got 12 and we have a decimal point, so that's how we say it, 12 and there's a 5 in the 10th place value. So we just say the number 5 and then what place value it's in. So 12 and 5 tenths. So let's look at our numbers. So we've got 12 and 5. And what place value is that? 5 tenths. There we go. All right.
I want to remind you guys there is not an assignment for this video. It's simply to take notes. There is not an assignment for this video. It's simply to take notes. You do not have the screen that's being shared right now. You do not have this assignment. We are only taking notes to become familiar with the base 10 blocks and how they're represented as decimals. You do not have the assignment. It's only to take notes.
Of what this number is, and then number 2, write the words of what. Now it's a little bit more practice, but the opposite way. So now we have 0.9. How do we write that in words? All right, so we know there's no whole numbers, and we have a decimal. Then the digit directly to the right of the decimal is the tenths, and there's 9 of them. So we say the number first, 9, and then the place value, tenths. So we know that this 9 tenths equals 0.9. All right, now let's look at the hundredths place value. So we just learned that any number directly to the right of the decimal point is the tenths. The next number over is in the hundredths place value.
Very important, guys. I know I've said it 1,000 times in this video alone. Please have the place value chart handy. If you do not, here's another opportunity to write down the place values to the right or behind the decimal, the tenths, and then the hundredths. The right of the decimal represents part of a number or a fraction of a number, small piece of the pie.
So if I had a 2 right here, a 0 right here, decimal point 0.02, we know that that is, you say the number first, 2, and then the place value, hundredths. All right, let's get some practice with our base 10 blocks. Now remember, the hundreds base 10 blocks represent a whole number. We don't have any whole numbers. The base 10, the 10 blocks represent our tens place value, which is right here. We got 4 of them, and our ones represent our hundreds. So we have no whole numbers, and we have a decimal point and 4 in the tenths place value. So we've got 1, 10, 20, 30, 40, and then we've got a 2 in that hundreds place value. So we're going to represent that with 2 of these. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 for 40 in that tens place value. Because remember, that 4 really represents 10. And then we've got 2 hundredths, which represents 42. 42 hundredths. I'm going to write that down just so you guys can see. I want you to get practice writing words from our numbers. So with decimals, you're going to say that, write the whole number first. So 42, and then you write the place value of that second number. So the 2 is in the hundreds. So hundredths, remember, it's not hundreds, but hundredths. So remember to make sure to write the number first and then the place value of that last number. All right, let's get one more practice with these. All right, first thing we see, we have no whole numbers, so we know we're not going to use any of those. We have no tenths, so we're not going to use any of those blocks, but we have 7 hundredths. So let's represent that using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sorry about that, 5, 6, 7. All right, this represents 7 hundredths. Remember, if we're going to write this in words, write the number first. So we've got a 7 and then the place value, which is in the hundredths place value. So 7 hundredths. All right, one more. We've got a 3 in the tenths place value. So now we're going to represent that with 1, 2, 3 of these, 3 tenths and 3 hundredths. 1, 2, 3. Notice again, we're not going to use any of these hundreds blocks because we don't have any whole numbers.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen, for the second part of your notes. Make sure that you have the notes from part 1 video and this one, part 2. You will need them for the assignment for part 3. I know there are a lot of parts today, but they make up the whole lesson. Part 1, part 2, part 3. You need all 3 videos for the entire lesson. Please see your agenda if you have any questions on when you will continue with part 3.